What are you searching for in your life? Dialogue on Dhamma. Bhikkhu Tissa meets a skeptic. Outside a Buddhist temple, early on a summer Saturday morning, a monk named Bhikkhu Tissa is sweeping the stone walk. His work is neither slow nor fast, but steady and careful, as if the sweeping of dust and leaves were something important to him. From the road some yards away comes the hum of an approaching automobile. In the morning quiet, the hum rises to a rumble, and a shiny sports car passes by. If Bhikkhu Tissa were watching, which he is not, he would notice that the driver momentarily slows down and regards him curiously before disappearing around a curve. Then there is a slight screech of tires, and in a moment the sports car returns and zooms into the driveway by the temple. Mr. Carp, a young man in expensive casual clothes, climbs out and approaches the monk. Mr. Carp: "Hey there, friend." Bhikkhu Tissa: "Good morning." Carp: "My name's Carp. I'm a friend of Charlie Prentice. You know him, I think?" Bhikkhu: "Oh yes, Mr. Prentice comes by quite often now." Carp: "You are Bhikkhu Tissa, aren't you?" Bhikkhu: "Yes, I am." Carp: "Or Venerable Tissa," Charlie says. "You guys sure have some strange names." Bhikkhu: "Is there anything I can do for you, Mr. Carp?" Carp: "Probably not, to tell the truth. I'm on my way down to the beach, and anyway, I'm not really interested in Buddhism. But I was reading these books, see?" Bhikkhu: "Books on Buddhism?" Carp: "Yes." Bhikkhu: "Why were you reading books on Buddhism if you're not interested in it? It sounds like a terrible waste of time." Carp: "Well, I mean, maybe it was. Charlie gave me those books, and let me tell you, they were pretty annoying. All that talk about suffering. I mean, page after page of misery, old age, death, and so on. It sounds like Buddhism is the most pessimistic religion in the world. I got to thinking about it, and I was wondering why you Buddhists have such a negative attitude toward life and why you dwell on suffering." Bhikkhu, musing: "You might also say that suffering dwells on us." Carp: "How's that?" "Anyhow, I saw you just now and I thought, why not ask the guy about it? So I have a few questions. Unless you're busy, of course." Bhikkhu, smiling, leaning the broom against a wall: "I'd be glad to try to answer questions about the Dhamma." Carp: "Dhamma? That's the word that keeps popping up in those books. What does it mean?" "I forget." Bhikkhu: "Usually it means just the teaching of the Buddha. It also means truth, reality, the way things are, the law of the universe, bare phenomena themselves, the path to deliverance, depending on the context." Carp: "It's pretty important, huh?" Bhikkhu: "The word is just a word. What's behind the word is the most important thing in the world." Carp: "I figured you'd say something like that. I'd like to hear about it. Say, could we sit down somewhere?" Bhikkhu: "Sure. How about this nice patch of grass over here?" Carp, with an attempt at humor: "I guess you don't have any lawn chairs around here." Bhikkhu: "We make do with what we have. I find grass very accommodating." They sit down in a shady spot. Mr. Carp uncomfortably inspects the area for ants. Carp: "You know, Bhikkhu Tissa, I never met a Buddhist monk before. I understand people treat you monks with all kinds of respect." Bhikkhu: "Depends on the person, depends on the monk." Carp: "You get called Venerable Sir and all that." Bhikkhu: "We get called other things too." Carp: "Yes, I bet you do. But let me get on to my questions. This business of suffering really bothers me. Isn't there enough trouble in the world without you Buddhists harping on it?" Bhikkhu: "It's precisely because there is trouble in the world that we pay attention to it, or harp on it, if you will." Carp: "Do you think you can do anything about it?" Bhikkhu: "Yes. That's the reason Buddhism exists." Carp: "This I want to hear. To me, it seems like we should emphasize the happy side of life. Why should we pay attention to all the misery? Bhikkhu. If a wasp stings you, do you pay attention to it? Carp. Well, of course. Bhikkhu. But what good does that do? Why dwell on it? Carp. Because I want to get away from it because I don't want to be stung again. Bhikkhu. If you don't want to be stung again, it would make sense to learn something about wasps, wouldn't it? Where they build their nests, what's likely to upset them, how to keep from annoying them, and so on. There are a great many kinds of suffering in the world, and they all have their own causes and characteristics. If you feel any of these afflictions or think that you might be prey to them, wouldn't it be wise to take a good look at them and see what might be done about them? Carp. Yes, that's so, I suppose. But any way you go, there's some amount of trouble, so I prefer to accent the positive, so to speak. You've got to take the bitter with the sweet. Bhikkhu. Would I be wrong in guessing that you have a fair amount of sweet in your life? Carp. It's true, I'm getting along real well. I work for a real estate development company, organizing some new projects. And to tell the truth, I'm doing pretty well at it. Life's good to me, I admit. That's why I object to Buddhism. Bhikkhu. Are you completely satisfied with the way things are? Carp. Not completely. Who is? The important thing is to keep totally in command of your life. Bhikkhu. Permit me to disagree. Nobody keeps totally in command of his life. Consider just your body. You look pretty healthy, but can you keep your body from ever getting sick? Can you keep it from getting old and breaking down, or from dying? Carp. No, I can't do that. Bhikkhu. Or consider your work. Can you be sure your colleagues will treat you fairly? Carp. Grunting. Those guys? No way. Bhikkhu. Will your creditors always be tolerant? Will your customers always pay their bills quickly? Will your competitors put up no resistance? Carp. Uncomfortably. There's a lot of uncertainty in business. Bhikkhu. There's a lot of uncertainty in social life, in family life, in all spheres of activity. Am I wrong? What do you think? Carp. No, I can't deny it. Bhikkhu. Or, to get right down to the most important thing, can you keep totally in control of your own mind? Carp. I'm a pretty cheerful guy. Bhikkhu. That's not what I asked, Mr. Carp. When things go wrong around you, can you keep your mind steady and peaceful? Carp. Of course not. How could that be? Bhikkhu. If you tell your mind not to get upset or angry or distracted, does it obey you? Carp. That's a funny way to look at it. But no, I guess my mind pretty much does what it likes. Thoughts and feelings just come boiling up. Bhikkhu. Then you certainly aren't in command of your mind, are you? And if you can't control your body or your mind or the actions of other people, you can hardly say you're in command of your life. Carp. It was just a figure of speech. Bhikkhu. Let's examine this a bit further if you don't mind. How many people do you think can control their lives to any degree? Carp. Not many, probably. You never know what will happen. Bhikkhu. Right. You never know what will happen. If it's pleasant, you will be elated. If it's unpleasant, you will be upset and depressed. If someone is kind to you, you'll be gratified. If they cheat you, you'll be angry. Tell me, Mr. Carp, do you see any independence or security in this state of affairs? Carp. Since you put it like that, not much. I suppose we have to admit we live in insecurity and dependence to a large degree. Bhikkhu. Would you call this situation pleasant or unpleasant? Carp. Unpleasant, mostly. Bhikkhu. The Buddha spoke about sorrow, pain, and insecurity not because he liked them, but because he saw them as the key to an understanding of life. Carp. Pessimistic, like I say. Bhikkhu. A fact is just a fact. If you're going to come to a good decision about how to act, you need accurate information about the matter at hand. So you look, and you take note of the important details you see, regardless of whether or not they are personally appealing to you. Carp. What was the Buddha looking for? Bhikkhu. Ah, a good question. He was looking for a way out. Carp. A way out of dependence and insecurity? Bhikkhu. Exactly. The word that describes this situation is dukkha. This is usually translated as suffering, but it means a great deal more than that. Unsatisfactoriness might be a better word. Carp. Well, excuse me, Bhikkhu Tissa, but when you get right down to it, everything is unsatisfactory to some degree. Bhikkhu, indeed. Carp. Nothing is completely dependable. You can't expect that. Everything has flaws. Bhikkhu. How about permanent? Are pleasure and security permanent? Carp. Not in my experience. You've got to keep chasing them down. That's what life is all about. Bhikkhu. Let's see if I can summarize a bit. Nobody, at least nobody that we know of, can truly control his own body and make it do exactly what he wants. Nobody can tell his mind how to behave when disturbing events occur. Nobody can prevent disasters from happening to him or keep people from doing things he doesn't like. Nobody can make pleasures last or keep good feelings from fading away. So we find ourselves always running after something desirable or away from something frightful. What would you call this state of affairs? There is a pause while Mr. Carp fidgets, plucks grass blades, laughs. Carp. Suffering. Okay, suffering or unsatisfactoriness or whatever you want to call it. It goes pretty deep, does it? Bhikkhu. It is stitched right into the fabric of things. You could even say it's the thread in the fabric itself. Carp. What a view of life. Now let me ask, the Buddha was looking for a way out, and he found it, I suppose. Bhikkhu. He did. The way out that he found is called Dhamma, the word we began with. Carp. So this Dhamma that the Buddha created can get us out of suffering. Bhikkhu. The Buddha didn't create it. He only discovered it and made it known. The Dhamma exists whether or not anybody knows it or understands it, just as apples will continue to fall from trees whether or not anyone understands the law of gravity. Carp. Is Dhamma some kind of God? Bhikkhu. No. The Dhamma has many aspects, but basically it is just the way things are, the underlying laws of the universe. Carp. That sounds simple enough. Why isn't it self-evident then? Why don't people recognize it? Bhikkhu. Suppose on a dangerous seacoast there were a powerful light, a great beacon in a lighthouse. Would that be self-evident to sailors? Carp. Certainly. Bhikkhu. But what if the sailors never came out of their cabins, or had the odd habit of wearing heavy cloths over their heads, or slept all the time? Carp. They wouldn't see it then. They would run aground. But what kind of metaphor are you suggesting? Bhikkhu. Fundamental truth, or Dhamma, is not by its nature hidden or obscure, though countless philosophers have thought so. But there is something that prevents us from seeing the Dhamma. It is called ignorance. This ignorance, this not knowing, this blankness, covers our minds and distorts our view of reality. The sailors in the ship may never leave the cabin. They may remain simply sunk in ignorance without trying to get out. Or they may intentionally blind themselves with the masks of foolish beliefs and delusions. Or they may sleep all the time out of laziness and stupidity, so they will not see the light and may even deny that any such thing exists. Carp. But suppose somebody does see this Dhamma, or sees enough of it to know it's a good thing. Bhikkhu. Then, if he's sensible, he'll follow it. He'll seek its protection. Carp. But what kind of protection can Dhamma offer against all this suffering and uncertainty we were just talking about? Bhikkhu. Above all, the Dhamma offers relief. There is relief from doubt, relief from fear, relief from mental anguish, relief from grief. As we study and practice Dhamma, our ignorance about how the universe works is gradually reduced. We begin to understand cause and effect. We see that Certain results follow from certain actions, and we learn to govern our actions in order to get happy results. So we gain relief from doubt and begin to have confidence in our ability to make sense of the world. Right now, we may be subject to all kinds of fears about what may happen to us, thinking that some terrible fate may come crashing down on us at any moment. But the Dhamma teaches us that fear is one result of clinging to a permanence that does not really exist. When we are reconciled to the always changing nature of things, fear can be overcome. Also, we gain relief from mental anguish, another result of clinging and craving, because we train our minds according to Dhamma merely to pay attention to events and objects, not to clutch them as me or mine. If we have no obsession with being a sufferer, then the suffering itself loses force. Then, as for grief, we have less to endure because we learn that all life is a constant flow and that grief is, in a sense, simply our own unhappy invention. To know how life works is a great protection because it gives us confidence and helps us avoid suffering. Carp. These are big promises, Bhikkhu Tissa. Bhikkhu, these are just possibilities, very real possibilities, but not things that will happen simply because someone calls himself a Buddhist. I don't expect you to believe them. Carp. You don't? Bhikkhu. Certainly not. Buddhism holds out great hope to mankind, but it does not expect or advise people to believe a set of doctrines without confirmation. Carp. And what kind of confirmation is necessary? Bhikkhu. Why, the confirmation of your own mind, your own reason, your own experience. Could anything less satisfy you? Carp. Well, I believe in my own experience, all right, but why do you bother to tell me about these benefits of the Dhamma? Bhikkhu. There is a saying that Buddhas only point the way. The Buddha doesn't save anybody. He only teaches people how to save themselves. He points out the problems of life and shows how they may be solved. We who are followers of the Buddha try to observe the same principle. We try to point out the way and encourage people to make the journey for themselves. Carp. So you think that if people will make this journey, they will find confirmation of Buddhist teachings for themselves? Bhikkhu. Yes. You see, the truths the Buddha points out are right here in the body and the mind. Anyone can see them who puts his mind to it, but he has to put his mind to it. Carp. Can you explain some of these truths? I assure you there's no danger of my believing them without proof. Bhikkhu. We've already touched on the truth of suffering. As we've noted, suffering or unsatisfactoriness is present in all worldly phenomena to one degree or another. This is one characteristic of existence that the Buddha repeatedly emphasizes. Then there is the fact of impermanence. Carp. Well, nothing lasts forever. Sure, I know that. Bhikkhu. Excuse me, but the mark of anakkata or impermanence is extremely deep. Anybody can notice gross physical changes, and these are certainly one aspect of impermanence. But few people realize that everything that exists in the world is whirling in a blur of change, rising and falling every second, flashing in and out of existence, being born and dying, appearing and perishing continually. Carp. You know, modern physicists describe atoms and subatomic particles in almost the same way, as changing with incredible speed all the time. Bhikkhu. So they do. But it's not necessary to study physics to understand this. The best laboratory is the mind itself. Have you ever known anything to change faster than your own mind? Carp. Sometimes I think my head will bust wide open, the way my thoughts run on. Bhikkhu. Sometimes faster and wilder than you would wish? Carp. I suppose I've already admitted I don't have much control over my mind. Sometimes it's just a storm of passions, ideas, emotions, memories. Bhikkhu. Can you remember a time when it wasn't like this? Carp. No, and that's pretty depressing. BIQ. It's simply the nature of the mind. Part of our trouble comes from conceiving the notion that the mind is ours, that it is stable and permanent, a self or an instrument of self. But mind is just mind, a collection of impersonal functions. Its nature is continual change. It isn't you, and it isn't I. Carp. I think we're getting into deep waters here. BHQ. I hope so. The point I want to make is that when you look at it, especially when you look at it, the mind is like a pan of popping popcorn. It just goes on jumping and making a racket, and nobody knows what it will do next. It is the best demonstration of impermanence there is. It just keeps changing. No matter how you want it to hold still, it changes. All the aspects of mind are constantly changing. Feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness itself. Wouldn't you agree? Carp. I guess so. Memories, feelings, all those things keep running on forever. Bhikkhu. This leads us on to the third mark of existence, non-self, or in Pali, anatta. Carp. I believe I read about that, but it seemed paradoxical to me. I mean, there is no self, but we think there is. Only it's just an illusion, and so on. Bhikkhu. The basic marks of existence aren't obscure in themselves. Here again, it's our own ignorance reinforced by craving that perverts our view. Let's consider non-self in the light of the other two characteristics I've mentioned, unsatisfactoriness and impermanence. Everything in the world is changing, impermanent, not lasting. So it is always, to some degree, liable to suffering or unsatisfactoriness. Anything we like or enjoy, we want to keep on enjoying, but we can't because it changes, breaks up, drifts away. Carp. Like my girlfriends, Bhikkhu, we are always liable to be separated from what we love or united with what we hate. Carp. If you only knew some of the idiots I have to work with. Bhikkhu. It's unsatisfactory to be where we don't want to be, and it's unsatisfactory to lose what we cherish. But that is the unstable nature of things. Carp. Wait a minute. I thought of something that doesn't cause suffering. My car. It's a real beauty you can see. Bhikkhu. And it never breaks down? Carp. Never. Of course, I just bought it 2 weeks ago, but it runs perfectly. No problems. Bhikkhu. Really? Carp. Sure. Of course, I've got to watch out for it. The other day in the parking lot, some idiot opened his door and banged the side. Took out a chip of paint. Unbelievable. Brand new car. I was furious. I could have killed the guy. Bhikkhu. I see. Was that a pleasant sensation? Carp, sheepishly. Actually, I felt lousy. It ruined the afternoon. My nerves are pretty bad when I get into conflict. Okay, I know what you'll say. I admit that was unsatisfactory. That was suffering. The car's paint is impermanent, and impermanent things are unsatisfactory. Bhikkhu. Well then, amid all this unsatisfactoriness and impermanence, do you see any real self? Carp. A self? Sure. I see me. I see my own self. Bhikkhu. Be careful now, Mr. Carp. What exactly does this self consist of? Carp. Well, I'd have to say it's my mind. Bhikkhu. Buddhism analyzes mind into feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Is yourself one or all of these? Carp. Well, I suppose I'd say all. Bhikkhu. But haven't we established that the mind and its functions are constantly changing? Carp. Yeah, I guess so. Bhikkhu. So, if the mind is constantly changing, where is yourself from one moment to the next? Carp. I don't know. Bhikkhu. Wouldn't it be changing? But in that case, what does this self really amount to? What makes it you if from moment to moment it changes into something else? When we say self, we are really talking about some stable identity, aren't we? But where there is no stability, we can't rightly talk about a self. Furthermore, if the mind is yourself, if it is your essence, then why can't you control it at will? Why can't you force it to be calm or happy or creative? And if you can't control it, as you admit, if you can't make it stay here or go there, then who does it really belong to? What sort of self is it? Carp. A pretty poor sort, I must say. Bhikkhu. Now, this mind which changes every moment, every instant, which you cannot control at will, does it make you happy? Does it please you? Carp. Mostly it's a pain, the way my mind runs on. Bhikkhu. Then if it causes pain, if it's unreliable, if it's constantly in flux, can we honestly call it a self? Carp. Oh, wait, now I'm confused. Perhaps self is just a way of speaking. Bhikkhu. Indeed it is. But what is behind the word? Just a flux of uncontrollable, unreliable conditions. Carp. Well, Bhikkhu Tissa, I don't know what to say. If you look at it that way, self is a rather flimsy concept. Bhikkhu. Just so. It's a concept that doesn't accurately reflect the facts. Events occur, one after the other, with terrific speed. We can observe the process. But self is merely a concept imposed on top of it. When we Buddhists talk about non-self or anatta, we mean this bare process of events giving rise to other events. Carp. Yes, I follow your logic, but still, I feel that I am a self or have a self. Bhikkhu. On a conventional level, self is a perfectly useful term. It's necessary for language and communication. I am I and you are you. That's true enough in everyday language. But the trouble arises when we attribute to self a fundamental reality it doesn't possess. By imagining a precious ego, by believing foolishly that we are permanent and satisfactory selves, we set ourselves up for suffering. Carp. Because the universe is not permanent or satisfactory. Bhikkhu. Exactly. Anyone who persists in living contrary to the laws of the universe will continue to experience suffering. Carp. This is really extraordinary. I'm going to have to think this over. But you haven't convinced me. Not at all. Bhikkhu. These three marks of existence, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self, are significant because they indicate the way the universe is and the sort of conditions we have to deal with. Unfortunately, most of us, out of ignorance, see things incorrectly. We take what is changing as stable. We take what is imperfect and unsatisfactory as satisfactory. We take what is without a self as having a self. Carp. If what you say is true, then most people are living exactly backward to the way they should be living. Bhikkhu. Yes, and that in itself is another aspect of dukkha or unsatisfactoriness. Carp. All right, you Buddhists do have some justification for talking about suffering, but one thing I still don't understand is why people misinterpret the world so grossly. Is it simply out of ignorance? Bhikkhu. When we talk about ignorance, we mean more than the absence of information. We mean self-deception and lack of judgment as well. For example, if we have a problem to solve, we can gather information about the problem and from that information come to a conclusion. But what if the information is faulty? What if we have misunderstood the facts to start with? Then we begin reasoning with false premises, and no matter how clever we are, our conclusions will turn out false too. The problem of understanding life itself depends on properly understanding facts. When we are ignorant and uninstructed, we tend to take things at face value. Human nature being what it is, we gravitate toward pleasant objects and shun unpleasant objects. Because we are fond of pleasure, we try to magnify it wherever we see it, and because we hate pain, we magnify that. Simply speaking, we run to extremes. We have no special motivation to analyze the objects of our senses as long as they keep us entertained, as they do so well. Moreover, Because we live a fair number of years and because there is a continuity in our experience, we fasten on to the notion that we are selves or souls who experience things and have a definite identity. We don't know any better, and without investigation, we have no particular reason to question this life of loves and hates and quick assumptions. We rely on our ignorant biases and continue to suffer. Carp. This ignorance sounds like plain carelessness and stupidity. Bhikkhu. Yes, to the Buddha, ignorance is not just a neutral not knowing. It is a very reprehensible defilement, a dangerous and foolish self-deception. Carp. Now there's a funny old word. Defilement. It sounds so negative. Who would want to believe in defilement nowadays? Bhikkhu. Well, I ask you, who would want to escape suffering? Carp. There is a connection? Bhikkhu. Of course. Ignorance is the basic defilement, the source of all greed, hatred, and delusion. A mind clouded by defilements cannot see reality. Not understanding, not seeing the marks of impermanence, suffering, and non-self. A person acts as if things were quite the contrary. Thus arises conflict with the laws of nature, and misery follows. Carp. But how exactly does this misery come about? Bhikkhu. Are you familiar with the Four Noble Truths? Carp. Oh, them. Yes, I read about them. They sounded depressing at the time. Bhikkhu. But not now. Carp. Well, I'm thinking about it. Bhikkhu. Sometimes people only hear the first noble truth, which states the universal problem, that life passes away, that it breaks up, that health gives way to sickness and life gives way to death, that all experiences and components of ordinary existence are impermanent and flawed. Not that they are necessarily suffering all the time, indeed they are sometimes full of pleasure, but they are always liable to suffering. Carp. That is a pretty sobering assessment. Bhikkhu. The second noble truth is the origin of suffering. Suffering has a cause. This is a deceptively simple statement that contains much meaning. Suffering does not happen spontaneously. It is caused and conditioned by other phenomena. As the primary cause, the Buddha singled out craving. Wherever this craving or obsessive desire springs up, suffering is sure to follow. Why? Because craving leads to grasping and clinging to what is inherently unstable. All delightful objects, experiences, and persons break up and disappear. So whenever we indulge in craving, we are bound for disappointment and pain. Carp. All right, I am with you so far. But how do we get out of this mess? Bhikkhu. The first two noble truths state the problem. The second two reveal the solution. The third noble truth is called the truth of the cessation or ending of suffering. Carp. Well, it's about time. Bhikkhu. The Buddha realized that every phenomenon that arises from causes and conditions, and that when those causes and conditions are removed, the phenomenon must disappear. Suffering has a cause. The cause is craving. When craving is brought to an end, suffering is also brought to an end. Carp. But that's easier said than done, I expect. Bhikkhu. Yes, and that's where the fourth noble truth comes in. The Buddha states that there is a problem, namely suffering. There is a cause of the problem. There is the possibility of eliminating the problem. And finally, there is a specific way to eliminate the problem. The fourth noble truth is simply the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha's prescription for dealing with the unsatisfactoriness in life. The 8 factors of the path are 8 virtues or skills which can gradually weaken and ultimately destroy the craving that oppresses us. Right views means having a correct understanding of the way the universe operates, the way suffering springs up in our lives. Right intentions means directing our thoughts and intentions toward wholesome things, toward kindness, mental purity, and self-training. Right speech means refraining from harsh, false, or useless speech. Right action means acting in a virtuous way, carrying out our intentions and following the moral precepts. Right livelihood means earning a living by honest and respectable means, fairly, not cheating anyone, not harming any living creatures. Right effort means making an effort to guard the mind, to overcome unwholesome mental states such as greed and hatred, and to replace them with generosity and loving kindness. Right mindfulness means developing attention and presence of mind, not being careless or unobservant. Right concentration means focusing the mind skillfully on objects so as to know them deeply without being distracted. These 8 factors summarize the training. Carp. I hate to criticize Bhikkhu Tissa, but that word training has an unpleasant sound. Life's hard enough. Who wants any more training than he has to endure already? Bhikkhu. What makes you think this training is disagreeable? Carp. I mean, all those factors, all that discipline. I don't think I'd like to take it all on me. Bhikkhu. Pardon me, but the purpose is to take it all off you. Carp. I don't understand. Bhikkhu. Buddhism as a religion, or as a way of life, aims at lightening your burden, not increasing it. It is the untrained, undisciplined mind that is weighed down and obstructed with woe, just as a person who has no training in finding his way in a jungle is likely to lose the path and struggle miserably through thick vines and thorns. We are so accustomed to carrying unpleasant burdens that we can only think of taking on new, pleasant burdens instead of putting them all down. The Dhamma is a training in putting down. As such, it liberates and gladdens us. Carp. Well now, Bhikkhu Tissa, I've got to say I enjoy some of these burdens. Why should I get rid of them when they are really the only things that make my life worthwhile? Bhikkhu. Here we have arrived at an important point, Mr. Carp. Every person has pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral experiences. Naturally, we prefer the pleasant, but the burdens I refer to are not the experiences themselves. They are our attachments to those experiences. Carp. You're getting subtle on me. Bhikkhu. Remember, the Buddha identifies craving as the primary cause of our pain, disappointment, and suffering. This craving or mental hunger is a strain or burden on the mind. It causes us to struggle against the natural, changing state of things. For instance, suppose we hunger after some desirable object and try to obtain it. Then we suffer the strain of longing, the worry about getting the object, the fear that somebody else will get it first, and the uncertainty of whether we really have the means to obtain it. If we fail to achieve our ends, our inflamed mind suffers disappointment. If we do get what we want, then we have to protect it, take care of it, see that it is not stolen or destroyed. So we suffer anxiety on account of our craving and attachment. Then we have to deal with the unfaithfulness of our own mind. The mind changes. We may decide we don't like the object after all, so we have the worry of getting rid of it. Or the object turns out to cause us problems of one kind or another. Then our attachment turns to aversion, and we suffer the misery of being united with what we don't like. Or suppose we continue to enjoy the object. Not only does the mind change, the object changes. It breaks, it runs away, it rusts, it gets old. Sooner or later we are separated from it, and then we feel grief. Then, not knowing any better, to cover up this grief, our insatiable mind goes lurching after some new object, mental or material. And the wheel keeps turning through the seconds and through the years, and we do not escape. Carp. Bhikkhu Tissa, there's a lot of truth in what you say. I can't deny it. But how else can a person live, if not by reaching for things? How can anyone be happy? Bhikkhu. Indeed, we must reach for things, but the right things and in the right way. To put down the burden of craving does not mean to stop acting in the world. It means to cut off our foolish hunger and vanity. The virtuous man, the happy man, is one who follows the middle way, who is moderate in his desires. Buddhism teaches that good results follow good actions and evil results follow evil actions. Events cause and condition other events, so we should act responsibly, knowing that we do, in effect, shape our own future. When we cut off an impulse of blind craving, we gain peace in this very moment because the mind is no longer irritated, and we gain benefit in the future because we have set up no painful cycle of grasping and losing. It is advantageous to live simply without superfluous possessions and entanglements, but the most important thing is to root out craving itself. Carp. So I don't necessarily have to give up things? Bhikkhu. Ah, Mr. Carp, you must give up what is painful. You must give up what hurts. Carp. And craving hurts? Bhikkhu. Just look at your own mind, that's all. Carp. Do you think I should meditate? Bhikkhu. I think you should examine yourself and watch the changes in your mind and body. Carp. Where does all this lead, Bhikkhu Tissa? Does it lead to happiness? Bhikkhu. Yes, but not happiness as most people have been conditioned to think. True happiness is not the piling up of sense pleasures. True happiness comes from liberation from the defilements, from clear sight, from an open, generous heart that does not fear the ceaseless change of things. Carp. What about all this I've read about supramundane wisdom? Bhikkhu. Wisdom arises from the practice of Dhamma. It is a tool that helps us reach the goal, but it is not the goal itself. Carp. The goal is the end of suffering, right? Bhikkhu. Right. Some people develop what you might call a craving after wisdom, wanting to know the secrets of the workings of things, out of curiosity or pride. This is knowing for its own sake, and it is not useful. In fact, the Buddha refused to answer speculative questions about the origin and the future of the universe because such questions are distractions from the matter at hand, the problem of suffering and the overcoming of suffering. Carp. You know, I had the idea that Buddhism was only concerned with very lofty, esoteric things, not the everyday existence of ordinary people. It's somewhat encouraging to hear that Buddhism deals with how to achieve happiness in this world. Not that I necessarily believe it, of course. Bhikkhu. Sometimes people who are too much caught up in the world turn cynical, thinking that there is nothing higher than the gaining and losing of status, objects, or relationships. Not seeing that a higher, worthier, and more peaceful everyday life is possible, they become bogged down in entertainments that fail to satisfy. Carp. I wonder if you're referring to me, Bhikkhu Tissa. Well, it doesn't matter. I can testify that lots of my unreligious friends just don't believe that any different kind of life exists. You're suggesting that it does. Bhikkhu. The Dhamma suggests that it does. Now let me return to your charge of pessimism. Carp. Well, I'm having second thoughts about that. Bhikkhu. Buddhism deals with the problem of suffering and the cure of suffering. Once we recognize that a disease exists, we can treat the disease if we have the medicine at hand. Imagine the joy of health to someone who has never before known health. Imagine the relief of someone who has carried a boulder on his back all his life and now can set it down. Carp. Yes, I can see that. But really, Bhikkhu Tissa, I don't want to go live in a cave and meditate all the time. I've got to make a living in this world. Bhikkhu. There's no need to live in a cave. The practice of Dhamma can and should be carried on wherever you find yourself. It is compatible with any kind of respectable livelihood. It depends on mindfully observing our actions from moment to moment, whatever we are doing, and so it can benefit the businessman as well as the monk. Carp. Well, my friend Charlie Prentice sure seems cheerful lately. But a fellow has got to figure out what is best for him. Tell me, if a person wanted to practice Buddhism, to follow the Dhamma, what should he do? I'm speaking hypothetically, of course. How does somebody become a Buddhist? Bhikkhu. Somebody becomes a Buddhist by following the teachings of the Buddha. Carp. Like the Noble Eightfold Path. Bhikkhu. Yes, but there's a brief saying that covers it all. To abstain from all evil, to cultivate the good, and to purify the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. Carp. That sounds pretty good. Could you explain just a bit? Bhikkhu. To abstain from all evil means to refrain from all actions that cause harm to oneself or others. It means to follow the 5 precepts, to avoid killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and taking intoxicants. Carp. I'm afraid I've been known to break a few of those precepts. Do you mean, for instance, that I shouldn't kill at all? Like not stepping on these ants crawling all around here? Bhikkhu. The precepts protect not only all animals, they protect you as well, because they keep you from doing actions which will coarsen your mind and cause you suffering later on. Carp. But suppose somebody just can't keep all these precepts perfectly. Bhikkhu. The precepts are not commandments. The Buddha wasn't a god who laid down absolute rules. The Buddha did, however, perfectly understand the world, and he simply pointed out that when someone keeps the precepts, he is acting according to Dhamma and building up protection and happiness for himself and other beings. The closer we can live to the precepts, the better it is for us. Carp. Keeping those precepts would certainly make you think. Now, how about doing good? Bhikkhu. Avoiding evil is the first step. But beyond that, we have to act virtuously and generously. A Buddhist is expected to demonstrate his kindness by helping his fellow beings, by making an effort to have a positive effort on his society. He should show the blessings of the Dhamma in his own conduct. Carp. And what about purifying the mind? Bhikkhu. The practitioner restrains his unwholesome impulses by observing the precepts, and he becomes a force for good through his own will. And through it all, he should strive to cleanse himself of the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion, and the ignorance that spawns them. He should move steadily, at whatever pace is suitable for him, toward deliverance from all suffering, toward enlightenment. Carp. What you describe is impressive, really. How can an ordinary guy do such a thing? I'm not really a strong person, I know. I am what I am mainly out of weakness, I guess. Bhikkhu. Mr. Carp, let me emphasize one thing especially. The Dhamma is the noble path for everyone, weak or strong or in between. Do what you can, because every act of kindness or virtue or mindfulness takes you a step closer to deliverance from sorrow. Carp. You're really serious about this, aren't you? I wish I could be like that. Serious, confident. You know, the trouble is, I'm so restless. I can't sit still. So I go racing here and there all the time. My mind wanders, so I wander too. Bhikkhu. This wandering is called samsara, the cycle of birth and death. Carp. That's depressing. Bhikkhu. Indeed it is. And that's why the Dhamma is such a relief. It can free us from that cycle. Carp. We're all wanderers in a way, aren't we? Bhikkhu. Yes. You and I and even that big red ant crawling up your leg. Carp. Yow! Mr. Carp jumps up and dances around wildly, brushing at his pants. Carp. Ow! Get off! Get off! These things will bite. Bhikkhu. Easy now, Mr. Carp. It dropped off. Carp. It did? Bhikkhu. It probably considered you an unsteady surface. Carp. Laughing suddenly. I am an unsteady surface. Bhikkhu Tissa stands up smiling. Bhikkhu. And what will you do about that? Carp, embarrassed. Well, I don't know. Say, listen, I've taken up enough of your time. Thanks for explaining things. I'd better get going. I'm heading down to the beach to meet some friends. Bhikkhu. I hope you have a safe drive. Carp. Oh, I will. It's a great car, a beauty you can see. Oh no. No. Did you see that bird? Did you see what that bird just did to my car? Bhikkhu. Yes, birds will do that. Carp, shaking his head. I just had it waxed, That makes me think, oh, never mind. Thanks for your time, Bhikkhu Tissa. Smiling to himself, Bhikkhu Tissa takes his broom in hand again. Bhikkhu, I'm glad you dropped by, Mr. Carp. Carp. Yeah, me too, I guess. Bhikkhu. If you'll excuse me, I'll get back to my work now. Carp, hesitantly. Oh, sure. Say, if you need any help around the temple, I wouldn't mind lending a hand sometime. Bhikkhu, that's kind of you, but we manage pretty well. Carp, no, I'm serious. I'd be glad to help anytime. Really? Bhikkhu, well then, would you like to sweep? The sidewalk out there needs it. Carp, startled. You mean now? But you've only got one broom. Bhikkhu, oh, there's another one in the tool shed there. Bhikkhu Tissa turns away and placidly resumes his sweeping. Mr. Carp fidgets for a moment, then goes and gets the other broom from the shed. He returns and waits awkwardly for instructions, but gets none. Finally, he begins sweeping the sidewalk, casting puzzled looks at the monk. At one point, he opens his mouth to say something, but shuts it again. Bhikkhu Tissa is no longer paying attention to him. With a bemused expression, Mr. Carp applies himself to sweeping the sidewalk. Little puffs of dust and leaves fly out to either side as the broom finds its rhythm. A morning breeze has now sprung up, swaying the trees above and sending flickers of light and dark, sun and shade across the sweepers.